It's the worst case scenario no one wants to talk about. What happens if America's nuclear missile silos are attacked? The Minuteman III is a powerful intercontinental ballistic missile capable of striking targets on the other side of the world, and it could be our best bet. But it's aging, and land based ICBMs have an Achilles heel. Hello, and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. The Nuclear Sponge is a 5-part project by USA Today that dives into the strategic debate and costs of modernizing the land leg of America's nuclear arsenal. Joining me to break down the design and finances of this undertaking, as well as insights into the delicate balance of global nuclear power at play, is USA Today defense reporter Davis Winkie. It's good to have you here, Davis.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the cost of updating it, can you give me a brief history of the nuclear sponge?
Yeah, the nuclear sponge is a colloquial term used to describe the nuclear missile silos that the U.S. has strewn about the Great Plains and Mountain West. There's currently 450 of them that house about 400 operational nuclear missiles. And the reason why it's called the nuclear sponge by some is that one of the strategic reasons for keeping these weapons, according to advocates, is they can be targeted in an enemy first strike and will therefore have enemy nuclear weapons strike these relatively remote areas rather than hitting more populated areas in the United States. The logic there is that if there's an all-out nuclear war scenario, anything that keeps more firepower from hitting American cities is a net good. It's disturbing logic, but those are the kinds of things that nuclear strategists get into every day. The term itself dates back to Air Force General Lou Allen, who is the chief of staff in the late 1970s. Allen, believe it or not, was actually a nuclear physicist who rose all the way to the post of the Air Force's top officer. And he put a lot of thought into this thing. The term over time has been largely co-opted by arms control advocates because of how well it evokes this sense of terror, frankly, about the idea that there are these potential sacrifice zones within the United States. But it's a very useful metaphor for understanding this part of the strategic calculus.
What might happen if U.S. missile silos are attacked, and why was the nuclear sponge approved for an upgrade?
So destroying a fortified underground missile silo takes, in fact, a nuclear weapon to do, or even two nuclear weapons to do. So nuclear warfare planners believe that it would require a massive amount of firepower to attack the nuclear sponge. And because trying to kill an underground target requires setting off the nuclear weapon at ground level, that would kick a lot of dirt and other debris up into the atmosphere, creating what we understand is radioactive nuclear fallout. Those fallout clouds would then drift across the United States, depending on the wind, and could, as our project shows, lead to populated areas of the United States, contaminate parts of our agricultural heartland, and ultimately extend their impact beyond just the immediate area surrounding the sponge. As for why the nuclear missiles in the region have been approved for an upgrade, ultimately it comes down to nuclear strategists believe that land-based nuclear missiles are still a very relevant part of America's nuclear arsenal. And the missiles that are currently underground, the Minuteman IIIs, are venerable. They're older than a lot of us today. They were put into the ground in the early 1970s. These silos are even older than the Minuteman missiles as well. They were built in the 1960s. You're starting to see infrastructure issues and potential reliability issues if you're trying to extend the Minuteman further. That's at least what the Air Force and advocates of building the next generation Sentinel missile to replace the Minuteman argue.
I was going to ask about the Sentinel program. What is it, and what was its initial projected cost?
Sentinel is going to be the replacement missile for the Minuteman III, and that it is going to be the primary nuclear missile that sits in underground land-based silos here in the United States. Originally, Sentinel was supposed to reuse the Minuteman silos. But as we just discussed, these silos are aging and there's infrastructure issues. One example is the water table has risen in parts of North Dakota where there are currently Minuteman silos. And you don't want a flooded nuclear missile silo, you might imagine. Ultimately, what this meant was that the Sentinel project was initially projected to be $77.7 billion. It was going to be an expensive undertaking, but planners saw it as an investment in American security. But as they got into the silo project and realized that it wouldn't be possible to just reuse these silos, and they would in fact need to dig new holes across the Great Plains and Mountain West, the cost has ballooned to up to $141 billion.
So that's where we stand with the budget. But what about Sentinel's date of completion? Because I understand the project is already years behind schedule.
Yeah, it's one of those things where they didn't know what the issues were going to be until they got into trying to solve them. Towards the end of President Donald Trump's first administration, the Air Force certified that the Sentinel project was ready to begin engineering development on silos and on other key aspects. That meant that the main contractor was approved to start building the tools to start building the missiles and the silos. What they found, though, was that they weren't ready to be at that point yet. And we're not looking at having that equivalent certification in place again until mid 2027. So they're not even going to start work on digging these silos until several years later than originally planned. And right now, we're looking at not having Sentinel missiles fully operational at the levels planned in the program until the 2050s.
Davis, we talked about what might happen if U.S. missile silos were attacked. What's the main argument for those in favor of completing this project? And what about those who are opposed?
The main argument in favor of continuing this modernization project and maintaining the land-based nuclear missiles is that they're seen as an integral part of what's called the nuclear triad. Advocates for maintaining these systems say the triad, which has nuclear bombers, nuclear submarines that can launch nuclear missiles, and then these land based nuclear missiles, say that each provides different advantages in the case of a nuclear war or in the case of deterring adversaries such as Russia or China from being aggressive in other ways. As for the land based nuclear missiles specifically, their advantage is they are the fastest to deliver a nuclear strike. You could send the order down to these missiles, and within 30 minutes or so, you would see nuclear warheads striking anywhere in the world. That kind of speed is not inherent to the other legs of the nuclear triad. And nuclear strategists who support maintaining the land leg believe that maintaining that like prompt strike capability is incredibly important when it comes to deterring or discouraging bad behavior from adversaries around the world. Opponents of maintaining these nuclear missiles argue that they make the world a more dangerous place. That's because the US has what's called a launch on warning posture. Essentially, it follows closely to what you might have seen in the Netflix movie A House of Dynamite recently. If the United States detects an incoming enemy nuclear attack, it is in our doctrine to consider launching a massive response from our nuclear missile silos, with the logic being we want to destroy an adversary's ability to hit us with more in case they haven't launched everything they plan to hit us with yet. The idea there is damage limitation. But opponents of these ICBMs say that the chance of a false alarm for an incoming attack makes the stakes really, really dangerous. And because the speed of nuclear weapons can be measured in minutes, the amount of time that the president, who is the sole authority when it comes to nuclear strikes, has to make a decision on whether to retaliate with our ICBMs or not is a recipe for disaster. These opponents argue.
As you mentioned, part of the Sentinel program includes adding more than 650 new missiles. Aren't we limited by treaty in the number of missiles we can deploy? Do we need more firepower? What are you hearing on that front?
This is another front where your advocates and opponents very, very strongly diverge. As you can imagine, nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament are two of the most polarized topics you can think of in the political landscape today. When it comes to the number of Sentinels being more than 650, the floor for the amount of deployed missiles set by Congress for this program is 400. And 650 is seen as the number of missiles that the Air Force needs to build in order to maintain a 400 missile deployment, which would continue the current number of Minuteman IIIs that we have. You need those extra missiles for things like testing, for things like extra parts, and then also to plan ahead for things like aging or maintenance issues, etc. So 650 is what they think they need to maintain that current level of firepower. With that said, the last remaining arms control treaty on the planet between the US and Russia, called New START, limits the number of nuclear weapons that we can have deployed at any given time. That treaty, however, is going to expire next month. And you have some conservative folks in the nuclear weapons world arguing that we should immediately deploy more nuclear weapons as soon as that treaty expires in order to show adversaries that we are prepared to wage a nuclear war against both Russia and China if it ultimately comes to that. Opponents argue, though, that even if you wanted to maintain the current level of firepower that our Minuteman III missiles have, you don't need as many Sentinel missiles. That's because there's a new nuclear warhead under development for the Sentinel that would allow it to carry multiple nuclear weapons and hit multiple targets from just one missile. The argument there from opponents is, hey, if you really think you need to have these things, okay, but here's a way that you can reduce the number of them and reduce costs. And that's, something that hasn't been seriously considered by Congress or by planners. Opponents of these weapons argue.
Davis, our history books say the Cold War and the arms race ended with the breakup of the USSR in 1991. Does the world stand on the precipice of a new Cold War? What role do nuclear weapons play?
That's a really good question. And frankly, it's going to be one that's easier to answer in 10 or 20 years. But we're seeing signs that all three of the players of in what a new Cold War would look like, US, Russia, and China, are taking significant steps and making massive investments in modernizing and expanding their nuclear arsenals. That's led some officials to issue very stark warnings. The head of the National Nuclear Security Administration in President Joe Biden's administration warned that we stood on the precipice of a potential arms race with China and that we stand to lose such an arms race. That's sobering to think of. But what it comes down to is a pretty clear-eyed assessment of Chinese industrial capacity compared to our current nuclear weapons construction infrastructure. The US is in the midst of a broader $1.7 trillion plan to overhaul that infrastructure, overhaul the arsenal, and upgrade more things than just the land based missiles. We're building new nuclear submarines right now. We're building a new nuclear bomber right now. We're developing new nuclear warheads right now. Uh, and so, even if we are having these warnings against a new arms race and a new Cold War, the pieces are already falling into place, I would say, for us to be at the starting line.
Finally, Davis, if the U.S. were to suffer a nuclear strike, there would, of course, as you said, be fallout. For your five-part series, USA Today built a fallout model. Can you share a little bit about how that model was developed?
We worked with noted nuclear weapons historian Alex Wellerstein, who has developed a lot of digital tools related to nuclear weapons. Some listeners may be familiar with his project Nuke Map, which you can enter geographic coordinates or a city name, select the size of a weapon, and it would show you what the effects of a nuclear blast would be for that location. Alex, for us, was able to adapt a Cold War era nuclear fallout model called WSEG 10 that the Pentagon used to plan for the worst case effects of nuclear war. He built something for us called the Fallout Machine. This allowed us to generate high quality renderings and even animated versions of what the fallout plumes could potentially look like for strikes against the nuclear sponge. That allowed us to highlight potential metro areas that could be at risk or agricultural areas that could be at risk. But Dana, let me tell you, our model that we used is frankly a pretty basic one as far as fallout models go. And I want our audience to understand that if there were nuclear war to this extent, there's no way that the effects wouldn't be felt even outside the fallout plumes that we've generated for our story. And our hope is that those models lead readers to want to know more about the decisions that have led us to this point and the decisions that may keep us on our path for decades to come.
We'll include a link to a fallout model in our show description. Davis Winkie is a defense reporter for USA Today. Thank you so much for coming on The Excerpt, Davis.
Thanks, Dana.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.